Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here tonight. Today I am going to be talking about some research that we conducted at a local site here in Mesa via Mesa Community College's field school. So we excavated there during 3 separate field seasons in 2020, 2022, and 2023. And I want to talk a little bit about what this site was and how we kind of had these initial interpretations of the site, and then kind of how those interpretations have changed over time and kind of push back against some of the assumptions that we originally had about this particular site, which is located actually in the Mesa Cemetery. We were not digging graves. I want to start with that. So we're working on undeveloped land in City of Mesa property on this that happens to be within the cemetery grounds. So a couple things as we get started about terminology. I am kind of the trend now in local archaeology is to try and avoid using the term Hohokam, which is traditionally what we refer to as kind of the archaeological sites that date to between about the turn of the millennium up through 1450 AD or so. We're trying not to use that term anymore because it is the result of a misunderstanding and a misinterpretation and also a mispronunciation of an Otham word. So we like to use the term as much as we can, either ancestral Sonoran desert dwellers, which is a bit of a mouthful, or ancestral Otham. And this is out of respect, but it also emphasizes the continuity between the ancient populations and modern Otham people and Pipash people that are living on the Salt River and Gila River communities, in addition to other Native American individuals in the region. So those are the terms that I'm going to use as much as possible. Of course, as archaeologists, we've been publishing papers with the term Hohokam for over 100 years now, so it's out there. So you'll also notice I'm using the Otham word for Mesa Grande, so that the site used to be called Mesa Grande. We now call it Dagĉi Muval Vaki, which means blue fly's house, and so that's an Otham term as well. And the site has officially been renamed that and is part of the museum here. It's not on the grounds, but it's kind of operated by the museum. Definitely worth visiting, at least when it's not 110 degrees. And I don't even know if it's open right now in the summer, but we're kind of associated with that at this site. So I'll situate you. So here is our site. We don't have a fun fancy name for it. It's just called AZU9319 ASM, which is the standard state of Arizona number for the site. It's located about 1,300 meters northeast of the Dagĉi Muval Vaki platform mound here. So that's where the big platform mound is, that's where the ceremonial mound, and then you can see we're here. And it's about 1,900 meters southeast of the river channel there. So, and in the past, there would have actually been a river flowing through there, and trees and all kinds of stuff like that. So this is what it looks like in the modern day. This is a Google Earth photo. So to situate you in the past, I'm going to show you a map here. So this is a map that Howard and Huckleberry devised in the 90s, and it shows the classic period settlement pattern in the lower Salt River Valley. And so on this map, all the gray blobs are the large ancestral Otham villages. So that's where people were living. So think of each of those as like a large town. They're kind of these semi-urban centers. Some of them had several thousand people living in them. Then all these little blue lines are the canal systems that existed that allowed all these people to live here in the desert. So our site is located up here, and it's in the Dagĉi Muval Vaki village. So the platform mound is kind of up here on the western end, and then all of this area here was a big residential settlement where several thousand people were living, and our site is located way up on the eastern margins of that, where that little red dot is, and So it's on the edge of the settlement, kind of in the outer neighborhoods. So our assumption is that this was an everyday residential place. It wasn't like necessarily an upper class settlement, although how much the ancestral Otham actually had upper class neighborhoods is highly debated. They probably didn't have a lot of them. But it's definitely out on the edge. It would have been pretty much an everyday domestic setting. So that's where the site was located, in the midst of this large community. So this is what it looked like in 2010. So in 2010, the cemetery purchased this plot of undeveloped land here that's all tan to make part of the cemetery. They did archaeological work here. Actually, some people at the museum did it. And they found some kind of residential houses, or we call them like compounds, down in here where all these trenches are. And then they found this mound up here that they identified as a trash mound. They decided to leave this alone, and the cemetery never actually used this plot of land so that they wouldn't destroy the trash mound. The reason they called it a trash mound is because it was this large mound full of dense artifacts, and all the artifacts are like broken and it looks like trash. However, the more we investigate it, the less it's looking like a trash mound in the sense that we would think of one here in the modern day. And so some of that was just our bias. We see a bunch of broken stuff, we think trash. And so that was the assumption. And that's the assumption we went off as we started our project. All of our research questions were about investigating refuse disposal and things like that. That kind of was the setup for our project. Then the cemetery landscape this area. So this is what the site looked like before we excavated it. And as you can see, it's all nice and landscaped. You can't see any artifacts on the surface. No one would ever know there was an archaeological site here. There's kind of this berm that the cemetery staff created, and then this depression area is where the site is located. That's what it looked like before we dug. These are what our excavation units looked like. So we set up a series of trenches and test units. We didn't know exactly where the mound feature was, so we were trying to find it. And then we wanted to document and see how deep it was, how well it was preserved, and all of those types of things. And then see if we could answer any questions about trash disposal behaviors. Here's a better map of the site, and kind of showing how we set up our excavation units. We divide them into 1 by 1 meter quads, so we kind of have very good spatial control of where all our artifacts come from, and kind of figure that kind of stuff out. I should emphasize our site is really small. If I go back here for a second, it's only about, 18.5 meters in this direction. It's like 4.1 meters here, 8.5 meters here. So it's very small. It doesn't mean this archaeological site was small. All of the rest of the cemetery, all the surrounding neighborhoods were part of the village, but they all got developed on over the centuries. In fact, when Midvale excavated, one of the early archaeologists in the region, when he was documenting the mound, he basically said the entire village had already been plowed under in the early 1900s, and because this was all like farmland back in that time period. So there was a lot of damage to this area, but somehow the mound survived all of that. We don't really know how, but no one wanted to develop on it, I guess. So there's more to this. I've talked to some of the local homeowners, and they all have found artifacts in their houses. And when you talk to the cemetery workers, they're always finding artifacts. So they're everywhere in this area. So we've got our excavation units, and so I want to talk about the kind of two different contexts that we found. So here, I like to call it the northern trench line. So we dug a trench line here. Our initial thought was this would help us find the trash mound or the mound feature. It didn't, because it's not up here. But we did find some other interesting things up in this area. We dug really deep. Essentially, this is what our excavation units look like. This is Unit 1. And what we found, we were able to document that there's a very heavy level of disturbance. So it documents the modern development. This upper layer here, which is between 35-60 centimeters deep, we find a mixture of prehistoric artifacts that could date from like 800, 900, 1000 AD to right next to soda bottles and asphalt and historic nails that are 100 years old, and all this stuff is all mixed up in this layer. So we find interesting artifacts, but they don't tell us much contextually because it's all mixed up. We don't even know if they came from this site or they got pushed over here from another part when the cemetery was doing developing and things like that. So we have this upper layer of disturbance that we were able to document. And then when we get below it, we find a nice little layer of softer soil and all the trash just drops off. We're finding way less, and then we start finding artifacts and only artifacts, or mostly artifacts, I should say. There's always, stuff works its way up and down the soil column over the time period, so some trash makes its way down, but this is what we think is a mostly intact cultural layer. So that's what we found. This was between 20 and 30 centimeters thick in this area of the site. So what we have is kind of like a buried prehistoric layer here that's pretty interesting. And then below that, we have the natural river cobbles, the kind of riverbed that the site was formed on. And so my poor students that had to dig through this in the last season, this is really challenging. And you're not finding any artifacts there, so it's not as much fun. It's just a bunch of cobbles. You could see all the stones that we pull out of there and things like that. So we have, this is just kind of showing the amount of ceramic pieces or sherds that we find in each layer. And so we have a major peak that's happening like right as we hit this green area here in this map. So we kind of are able to see that that's where we have kind of evidence of our prehistoric deposits. Now we have different kind of findings here in the center of the site where we actually found the mound feature in these excavation units. And so what we found here is a very, very thin layer of disturbance. It's between 5 and 15 centimeters deep. In this particular unit, it's usually about 5 or so centimeters to 10. We find almost no artifacts in this layer. I think in this unit, Unit 5, we found one ceramic sherd in the entire first 10 centimeters. So it's kind of this disturbed layer. There's not a lot there. It's mostly just grass roots, to be honest, and things like that. And then immediately after that upper layer, we enter a nice thick deposit of prehistoric layers. We're finding very little modern trash and just lots of dense artifacts, and the soil's different here. The soil in the rest of the site's super sandy. It's kind of gritty, and so when you're digging it, but when you hit this stuff, it's nice and soft silt that has almost no sand in it, so you can like even feel on your fingers that it's like, it doesn't have that grit to it. So seeing color differences in Arizona soils is challenging in the sun, but we could actually tell when we were in this from the feel of the soil rather than actually seeing it. Although in this picture sometimes you can kind of see it's a little bit grayer. So this is where we found a lot of artifacts. There's lots of artifacts. There's lots of charcoal here. So this is what we thought was the trash mound as we were excavating it and what we called it when we were excavating. And then below that we have our natural river deposits. You can see very dense cobbles here. And almost no artifacts are down in those layers. So what that told us is this mound feature formed directly on this layer. There was not like an older house there that they put the trash on, which happens sometimes, or anything. So they were kind of like, they put the trash down right, or the deposits down right on this kind of natural layers. We see our densest layers of artifacts are starting about 30 centimeters below the surface. So kind of right as we get below this area here is when we start really getting into the real dense artifacts. Although there's a good amount of artifacts up in these upper layers too. So where is our kind of trash mound in terms of where we wanted to see if we could identify it, this mound feature. So basically, we were able to define the eastern edge, but we couldn't define the northern or southern edge because the deposits went all the way up to the end of our units, and we didn't have the ability to or time to expand. So the northern edge must be somewhere in between here because we didn't find any of the deposits up in units 2 or 3. It's somewhere up in there. The southern edge can't be too far because the road is like right here. So either that or it got destroyed. So you have that. And then the reason I have this quad here white is there was so much disturbance in here, we couldn't define whether there was actually a feature there. There's like literally like plastic tarps and stuff all the way through this. Like it's lots of disturbance there. But that's kind of where we think our mound feature was. So I want to talk a little bit about the dating of the site. We couldn't do fancy radiocarbon dating. We didn't have the funds for that at a community college field school. Also, we didn't really have any good samples for radiocarbon dating. All of this stuff is kind of like free floating. We didn't find like distinct features in the sense that where you would want to take radiocarbon dates at an archaeological site. But fortunately, ancestral autumn artifacts have been very well documented and we can time them very well. We have a bunch of my students did different projects and were able to kind of find some dates for these sites. So Zislali Vega and myself worked on what we call a ceramic wear analysis. So we kind of did all these different we looked at basically plain ceramics that don't have decorations on them, and we're able to look at their surface texture, their temper, which is the little things you can see sparkling here, and other things like that, and figure out the time period when they were made, specifically because we found a lot of what we call Gila wares. So Gila wares are distinctive because they have sparkly mica in them. And this micaceous temper comes from the Gila River, probably around Gila Butte. And what that means is that this piece of pottery got traded up across the desert from the Gila River up into the Salt River region. And that trade network only existed in earlier time periods. It started to break down after 1150 to 1200 AD. So we know that the site dates to before that because we have all these Gila wares. In fact, we have high percentages. I was just doing some analysis yesterday and I found that we have actually really high percentages of Gila in our lowest layers at the site. So it's kind of telling that we have these kind of connections to the south, which shows we got this kind of somewhat earlier dates. And then I had a team of students, Gabby, Ryan, and Zane, two of who are here today, who did an iconographic analysis. So they looked at all of the designs we found on painted pottery. We have a lot less painted pottery, but we have a good amount. And this stuff is like super distinctive, and we have these very designs that date to only specific time periods. And so they found a range of things, but most of what we found kind of dates in between what we would call the Sakatone and the Soho period here. So it would be what we would call transitional pre-classic to classic period era. So that's very telling. And then one of my other students, Bill Dundas, did a projectile point analysis. And he was able to basically find the same thing we have here. The points he found, although there were some really early ones, of course those early ones could have come from somewhere else, most of the points dated to early Soho probably. So probably around 1100 or so AD. And points we can't date them quite as clearly as the ceramic style, so there's a bit of give and take with those. But all three types of data here corroborate each other. One on its own, we probably wouldn't be able to confidently say what our dates are. But with the three together, we can say we have dates that go back maybe as early as Santa Cruz, but most of the site occupation is within the Sakatone and Soho periods. If we want to put dates on it, we would say roughly between 950 and 1150, maybe up to 1200 AD is when we've got this when our site was occupied, when the mound feature was formed. We also have some other corroborating data that's not quite as strong. One of my other students have been looking at the shell, and she has identified that the bracelets we have all pretty much equal early classic period, which is what we have. Also, we're doing an obsidian analysis, and the sources where our obsidian is coming from are all in the north, and they kind of stopped using northern sources after 1200-ish AD. So again, that kind of fits the pattern. Again, if we all we had was the obsidian data, we wouldn't use that to date the site, but it kind of corroborates the other data. So that's kind of the kind of interesting aspect of this is all the data kind of is pointing to the same thing, is this kind of end of the pre-classic, early classic period era, which is interesting because when we started this site, we were thinking it was going to date kind of well within the classic 1200 to 1300, so in that kind of time period, because that's when the platform mound was constructed. But it's clear that the village was there before the platform mound, or maybe as it was forming, and we have evidence of that here at this particular location. Okay, so now we can kind of get to some of the pretty interesting parts of our findings was this feature a trash mound? So here is where, so this arrow here is pointing right to here. So was this feature area a trash mound? We got to use the evidence. We shouldn't just assume that it was a trash mound. That was our original assumption, but we need to prove it with the artifacts and the data. So what we ended up doing is doing a bunch of analyses, and our results are kind of preliminary. We're still working on some of them. But we have several lines of evidence to show that it maybe didn't form through what we might consider typical domestic refuse disposal. And so I want to get into those and then what the implications of that are. So I'll start with our first line of evidence, which is interesting. This one in itself doesn't prove it's not a trash mound, but it got our interest peaked a little bit. So this is what we called a sherd size analysis. This is something that I did with the help of many students to help me with the actual analysis itself. And so what I wanted to do is compare our mound to mounds that were excavated down in Tucson, because those are the only other published trash mounds from this same time period in all of Arizona. So that's the unfortunate thing about trash mounds, is no one publishes on them. So we wanted to compare to those trash mounds. And a team of researchers, Beck and Roos, did a sherd size analysis. So I kind of replicated their analysis using the same size classes that they did. So if you're new to archaeology, a ceramic sherd is just a broken piece of ceramic. And they come in all different sizes because some break more than others. And so to do this analysis, we used 4 different size classes. So smaller than 5 centimeters squared, and then you can kind of see the rest here. And the way that the original project was done was with a series of nested screens, and they just threw all the sherds in and sifted them, and they kind of like sorted them out. I didn't do that because we didn't have the kind of funds to build the screens, and also their methodology excluded all of the smallest sherds. Anything smaller than 5 square centimeters, or too much smaller, they weren't including in their analysis, and I wanted to include everything. So I did that, even knowing that would overrepresent the small sherds. So I created this little really simple tool, just drew squares on a piece of laminated paper. And so each one of these squares, so this first one is 5 centimeters squared, the second one is 16, the third one is 49. And basically all we do is we place the ceramic sherds on the tool and see which size class they are. And so sometimes you have to do a little bit of kind of figuring out how it's going to fit in there. So we have these 4 sherd size classes. And so we analyzed 20,814 sherds with the help of a lot of students. So our little site had this many ceramic sherds in it. So that just shows how dense our deposits were. So we did this analysis, And we had some pretty interesting findings. So what I found was, and we're going to focus on the very small sherds, is that a little over 66% of our assemblage was the sherds that are smaller than 5 centimeters squared, which is what we were expecting to find. We expected to find a lot of very small sherds, but as you can see, we have some not insignificant proportions of the larger varieties, even a few of the big 4 class, which is what these are here. So how does this compare to Tucson? What's going on at the Marana Mound complex? So what Beck and Rose found, and then they also did an analysis, they did an ethnographic analysis in the Philippines with modern trash mounds and kind of used some comparisons there. And so what they found is during the classic period, all the mounds excavated had very high percentages of these super small sherds, usually between like 90 and 99%, like very high percentages, which is what this circle here is showing us. And then they found during the pre-classic era, most of the mounds they looked at, which was a smaller number, had larger sherds, usually between 40 and only 40 to 50% had the very small sherds. So where does our site fall? Falls right in between here. So we have about 66%, so it's kind of different is what is happening here. And the reason that we are arguing there's lots of small pieces of ceramics in classic period trash mounds is that during this period we have what is known as secondary refuse disposal. So what that means is you throw something out once. So they lived in these big walled compounds, and they would throw things out like in the homes. Stuff would break a little bit, and then they would clear out the home once in a while and throw it in the trash mound. And in that process, more stuff would get broken. And so you end up with more smaller pottery fragments, our sherds. And also because the mounds are forming slowly, there's more trampling and other activities, and so the argument is that we have more smaller sherds. Where during the pre-classic, they're throwing things out directly into the trash mounds because their houses are right next to them. And the argument is that there's less breakage, there's also less trampling because the mounds are forming quicker. So there's less chance for things to break. We're kind of like right in between. We have a lot of small sherds, but it's nowhere near, we are significantly less than in the 90s here. So what we're kind of arguing is that our accumulation of ceramic sherds is kind of inconsistent with what we see elsewhere in the classic period. There's less breakage and we have more larger sherds. Now this doesn't mean this wasn't a trash mound. What it means is the trash disposal behaviors in this community were different than we saw down in Tucson. I've had several archaeologists from the Phoenix Basin say that down in Tucson are not really hohokam anyway. I don't really know what that means, but it's different down there is essentially what's happening. So different communities and things like that. So it could be that there were different behavior, but this is kind of something that piqued our interest. Something different is happening here. Another reason there could be more larger sherds is maybe this wasn't trash disposal. Maybe there's ceramics that are being deposited here for other reasons. And so the other artifacts help us tell that story. So the next thing I want to talk about is the shell that we've found at the site. So we did find some shell. I have 2 students working on this, Luna and Zithlali, and luckily they are doing that because I'm not a shell expert. They are trained and they can tell you what species it is just by looking at a little tiny piece of shell. It's all shell to me. So they've gone through this analysis, and so the important first thing is our consultations with the Salt River community. They say that all shell is sacred. There's no such thing for them as shell trash. What we as archaeologists have traditionally called production debris, they would still consider that to be sacred, and they would not just throw it in a regular old trash mound where they were throwing their the bones from their meal or something. So they would argue that its shell is not trash. I should emphasize, I don't have any pictures of shell here because we don't take pictures of shell because it's sacred. This is a drawing which is allowed, but it comes from 1979 publication. So we don't have a ton of shell, but we do have 216 fragments. My analysts have identified a minimum number of individuals, which what MNI means, of 61 marine shells. So we have at least 61 marine shells that are identified. We have 2 carved pendants. One was of a lizard that has just a slight little break in it, and it actually looks very similar to this. We actually originally thought it was a bird because our legs look more like wings, but our analyst says, no, it's a lizard, and it's called a whiptail, and it's kind of like this, and just the little tip of it's broken off, but that would not be enough for someone to just say, hey, I'm throwing this out. It could have easily been just kind of sanded down and fixed and things like that. So finding that is pretty telling. We have a broken frog pendant. We have like the little back legs of a frog, and no one noticed that in the field. We saw that in the lab. It's very subtle, but when you look at it, you can kind of see it closely. We also have 5 whole shell pendants. They're all really tiny. Most of them are smaller than my pinky nail, and they all have a little hole drilled in them that's clearly obvious, and so they're whole pendants that would have been on like a bracelet or a necklace or something, and they have these drilled holes. The cool thing about these is they are really, really tiny, and that indicates that instead of coming from Puerto Penasco and kind of the Bay of Cortez area down there, they might have, we can't say for certain, but they might have actually come from like San Diego area, suggesting even further trade. So we're kind of contemplating that. We can't say that conclusively, but it's kind of cool. And then we also have 4 whole shell beads that look like little kind of snail shells that have little holes in them when incomplete. 9 bracelet fragments, 2 ring fragments, and 8 pieces of burned shell. So none of this would be trash to an ancestral Otham person, especially effigy pendants, beads, pendants, whole shell pendants. They would never throw something like this out culturally. So that's telling us that this context, there might be something else going on here, and it's not just a regular old trash mound. So we need to kind of pay attention to this evidence. Even though like we have 20,000 sherds and 216 pieces of shell, this evidence is very telling. We're still working on this, trying to figure out some of the spatial patterning of it. My shell analysts are really interested to see if we can identify if there was like a bracelet that got buried somewhere, but I don't think we're going to find that. There was just too much mixing at the site to kind of do that. So we've got these types of shell. The other type of analysis that we did is a macrobotanical analysis and a charcoal analysis, which were done by Molly Kaur. So Molly actually started with us in 2020, and then she went and was a grad student at ASU, and she came back as a trained archaeobotanist and did all of our botanical analysis, which was totally awesome. And many of the students in this class got to work on some of that stuff are here in this room today. We took soil samples from a bunch of different units, 5 through 8, and we used a process called flotation. So for those of you that aren't archaeologists, we take the soil, we put it in water, all the rocks and soil sink to the bottom, all the organic material floats to the top. We skim it off, and then we look at it under microscopes and sort out the seeds. So we found a lot of things we would expect to find. We have a lot of chenopodium and chenoam, which is seeds that we can't tell the difference if they're actually amaranth or chenopodium. And these are ubiquitous at ancestral Otham sites. They're kind of these weedy plants that people still eat. They're wild, but they're still kind of useful. So they're everywhere, and they have lots of small seeds. So we find them all over the place. We have some corn, which is what AZMNH is. Interestingly, we also have this nicotina, which, as the name suggests, is actually tobacco, wild tobacco, and it is the most ubiquitous seed at our site. What that means is we find it in the highest percentage of soil samples. We found it in 45% of our soil samples, so it was kind of everywhere. Now, thing about tobacco, first of all, finding lots of tobacco seeds isn't out of the ordinary because tobacco pods, they look like this. One little pod can have hundreds of seeds in it. Tobacco literally has the smallest seed. So they are tiny, barely visible to the naked eye, really. Wild tobacco, but this is not a food. They're not eating it, and it is a sacred plant. So the fact that we're finding tobacco spread across this entire site is indicative of kind of offerings and things like that, rather than just everyday activities. People are not just going to be throwing out tobacco seeds in a trash mound. They're going to save them for rituals and things like that. So that's another really interesting telling thing that we have going on here. Molly also conducted a charcoal analysis. And I know charcoal sounds really boring and there's nothing we could learn from it, but there's actually a lot that we can learn. So the bigger pieces of charcoal, she could look at them under a microscope and tell you if it's from a hardwood or a softwood. And that's really telling. So all of the indigenous trees of the Salt River Valley are hardwood trees. So they're things like mesquite, ironwood, palo verde, cottonwoods. There's some cottonwoods that would have grown along the rivers in ancient times, things like that. But softwoods are pines. Pines don't grow here naturally. And so what we have when we start looking at our sites is it's dominated by the hardwood, the red here, but we have a not insignificant amount of pine charcoal at the site. That means someone is bringing pine wood from higher altitudes at a minimum dozens of kilometers away, possibly even further, to use. So we assume, and we think it's a pretty good assumption, that this is not regular old firewood for boiling some corn. This is probably for ritual fires, ritual offerings of some kind. We can't say that for certain, but the fact that it's coming from such a long distance away means it's not just a practical firewood. There's something else happening here. And so any one of these lines of evidence on its own, we would not be able to say, oh, this is not a trash mound, or there's something else going on here. But taken together, it's very telling that maybe something different is happening at this site. What we have basically are assumptions that it was a trash mound or purely a trash mound seems to have been incorrect. Now, it's not purely ritual either, I don't think necessarily, because there are some trash things there. We have lots of lithic dagĉ, basically trash that's left behind when you're making stone tools. We have a ton of that, and that's usually not considered sacred. So that's kind of interesting in and of itself. But based upon a lot of the other evidence, it seems that this mound may have formed through repeated ritual offerings, so an accumulation of these offerings in the same place over and over again. And we've come to this conclusion, or tentative conclusion at least, in part through our consultations with the local tribal communities. They say that this is what happens. There'll be certain areas that'll kind of almost be like fenced off where offerings will be made. The interesting thing is, so for lack of a better term, sometimes we call these shrines in the literature, although most documented shrines are not in communities. They're usually like out on the landscape associated with like sacred mountains or geoglyphs or other things like that. So, and they usually have lots of stones on them, little round river stones, colorful red and green stones and things like that. We don't have as much of that here. It's a little bit different. Also, it's in the community. That's kind of interesting as well. So it's a domestic shrine of some kind, which we shouldn't not expect. It's just people haven't been looking for them, I don't think. So what this means is we need to reevaluate some of our contexts where we have traditionally called things trash. Possibly even what we call trash and refuse. There's more and more of this happening. I have some anecdotal evidence. I have a former student that's working on a CRM project, and she says they were working on a trash mound, and the tribal consultants came out and they've reevaluated it, and now they're calling it a shrine. So this is happening elsewhere locally. I would love to compare our site to that site at some point. That would be fun, but we'll see if we can ever do that. So that's kind of interesting. So I'll give you a couple examples of maybe where we could reevaluate some things. So for example, at the Marana platform mound, there's all of these trash mounds, or middens as they called them, and they're full of shell. It's been very well documented by James Byman. And there's lots of whole shell pendants. He even took pictures of them back when we were allowed to do that, and they are in a lot of his publications. possibly what they were calling trash mounds when they did the excavations in the kind of early 90s or late 80s, whenever those excavations took place. They just assumed they were trash mounds because it was an accumulation of a lot of broken stuff, which is what we did here as well. But maybe we need to reevaluate contexts like this. If we're finding lots of shell, it could be something else. And they're within the community, so that could be interesting things to revisit. Another interesting thing to think about is when the ball quartz, so there's all these ball quartz all across Arizona, and they dated to the pre-classic. During the pre-classic classic transition, the ball quartz were famously abandoned. People stopped using them, and we don't know why. There's all kinds of speculation, but we don't really know why. Some people don't even like to call them ball quartz, they call them dance grounds, but I'll stick with ball quartz because that's what they're usually called. When they were abandoned, traditionally archaeologists said they were filled with trash. So my question is, was all this deposition really trash, or were there ritual offerings? And so maybe we need to reevaluate some of these things. Maybe they just called it trash because there was lots of broken stuff in these places. We know the ball quartz probably had ritual meanings to them, so we need to kind of keep that in mind as well. So these are kind of things, takeaways, things for us to think about as we kind of evaluate some of our findings, which, as I said, we're still kind of sussing some things out. But that's kind of the kind of gist of some of the lessons that we have learned from this. And one of the big takeaways is that we definitely need to kind of be consulting with the local communities, and their ideas are really going to help us understand what's actually going on at these archaeological sites. So I just want to finish. I have tons of people to thank, especially the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community Tribal Historic Preservation Office, which has consulted with us, helped us, supported our project in many, many ways. Lots of other archaeologists have helped us out. The city of Mesa invited us to do the project, especially Rick Fiffield at the cemetery was always very helpful. And lots of students, many students helped with all these analysis. I want to especially point out Ryan, Molly, Bill, Zane, Gabby, Luna, and Zithlali, because I presented some of their data here tonight from various analyses that were important to this project. That's where I'm going to finish here. Hope you found this interesting. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.